He came to fix a car. He had no idea this ordinary Tuesday was about to destroy everything he'd built.
One bad morning. One angry billionaire. And she needed someone to blame.
You tampered with my car, Daniel.
No, Victoria, listen, it's just a sensor, see?
11 minutes. That's all it took for his whole world to fall apart.
She laughed. She had no idea that laugh would be the beginning of her own downfall.
If you have ever been judged before anyone bothered to ask your name, this story is for you. Stay until the very end, because what happens to this single father will make you believe in justice again. And if it moves you even a little, hit that like button and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard by everyone. Now, let's begin. The rain over Ashford City fell in thin silver needles the morning Daniel Cole lost everything. He thought he understood about fairness. He was 34 years old, broad-shouldered from years of manual work, with tired brown eyes that still managed to soften every time his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, said his name. He ran a small auto repair garage on the edge of downtown, a business he had built with his own hands after his wife, Sarah, passed away from a sudden illness 3 years earlier. Since then, it had been just the two of them, Daniel and Lily, sharing a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, surviving on grease-stained hands and stubborn hope. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Daniel dropped Lily off at school, kissed her forehead, and promised to pick her up early so they could get ice cream, a small ritual they treated like a sacred appointment. He drove his old pickup truck to Kane Tower, the gleaming 50-story headquarters of Kane Global Industries, where he had been, contracted to fix a company vehicle that had broken down in the underground parking garage. It was supposed to be routine. It was supposed to be another ordinary Tuesday. Instead, it became the day his life shattered. Victoria Kane, the billionaire owner of Kane Global Industries, was in a foul mood that morning. Her company's stock had dipped 2% overnight. A board member had questioned her leadership in a closed meeting, and she had walked out of that meeting radiating the kind of anger that looks for somewhere, anywhere to land. She was 52, sharp-jawed, always dressed in tailored ivory suits that cost more than Daniel's truck, and she had built a reputation as a woman who never apologized and never lost. When she saw Daniel kneeling beside her Bentley in the garage, tools spread around him, oil on his hands, she didn't see a mechanic doing his job. She saw someone to blame. "What are you doing near my car?" she snapped, though her security team had scheduled the very repair he was performing. Daniel, calm as always, explained that he'd been called in by facilities management to fix the vehicle beside hers, which had stalled and was blocking the exit ramp. Victoria wasn't listening. Her phone had just buzzed with another piece of bad news, and she needed a target. She glanced at the open toolbox, at the loose cash sitting in her unlocked glove box, money she, herself, had forgotten to secure, and made a decision that would ignite a chain of events far beyond her control. "Someone call security," she said loudly, her voice echoing through the concrete garage. "This man has been going through my car." Daniel froze. "Ma'am, I haven't touched your vehicle. I'm working on the one next to it." But Victoria Kane was already performing for the small crowd of employees gathering near the elevators, her voice rising with theatrical outrage. "I want him arrested, now." Within 11 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived. Daniel, still in his oil-stained coveralls, tried to explain the situation calmly, showing the work order on his phone, the service ticket, the time-stamped photos he always took before touching any vehicle for insurance purposes. None of it mattered in that moment. Victoria Kane pointed a manicured finger at him and told the officers, with practiced conviction, that she had personally seen him attempting to steal from her car. She smiled, a small, satisfied curl of the lips, as the handcuffs clicked around Daniel's wrists. It was the kind of smile that comes from believing your money makes you untouchable. that your word will always outweigh someone else's truth. Please, Daniel said, his voice cracking as the officer guided him toward the car. I have a daughter. She's waiting for me. Please, just look at my phone. There's proof. Save it for the station, the officer said, not unkindly, but firmly. As they walked him past the gathering crowd, Victoria Kane laughed, a short, cold sound that carried across the garage. People like that always have an excuse, she said, to no one in particular, already turning back toward the elevator, already forgetting his face. She had no idea that laugh would come back to haunt her. In the back of the patrol car, Daniel stared out at the gray city, blurring past the window, and thought of Sarah. He thought of the promise he had made at her hospital bedside 3 years earlier. The promise that he would never let Lily feel unloved or unsafe, no matter what the world threw at him. He had built his entire life around keeping that promise, waking up at 5 every morning to have breakfast ready before school, learning to braid hair from online videos, working late nights so he could still make it to every school play. He had never missed one, and now, for the first time since Sarah passed, he felt the terrifying possibility of failing her completely, of Lily standing at the school gate at 3 o'clock with no one coming. At the police station, Daniel sat in a holding cell, replaying every second, terrified not for himself, but for Lily. Who would pick her up from school? Would she think he abandoned her? He begged an officer to call the school, to call his neighbor, anyone. It was Officer Maria Ibarra, a detective with 15 years on the force and an unusually sharp instinct for injustice, who finally stopped to actually look at the case file instead of rubber stamping it. Something about the report bothered her. The accusation was vague. There was no actual evidence, only the statement of a powerful woman and the assumption that a mechanic in stained coveralls must be guilty simply because he looked the part of someone easy to blame. Maria had grown up in a neighborhood not unlike Daniel's. She had watched her own father, a hard-working immigrant electrician, get accused of theft once by a client, who later found the missing item in a drawer and never apologized. She recognized the pattern instantly. Instead of processing Daniel through the system quickly, she asked to review the security footage from Kane Tower's parking garage. What she found stunned her. The garage's own surveillance cameras, which Kane Global Industries had installed for asset protection, captured the entire incident in high resolution. Daniel never touched Victoria's Bentley. He worked exclusively on the neighboring company vehicle, exactly as his service ticket stated. The footage also caught something else, something far more damning. It showed Victoria Kane's assistant, moments before the accusation, quietly removing a folder of documents from the back seat of the Bentley and placing them into a shredder bin near the elevator. A folder later revealed to be linked to an internal audit Victoria had been trying to bury for months. The audit concerned falsified expense reports, shell consulting contracts, and diverted funds, nearly $40 million unaccounted for. Victoria hadn't just found a convenient scapegoat that morning. She'd used Daniel's arrest as chaos, as a distraction, a way to clear the garage of witnesses while her assistant destroyed evidence in plain sight. Detective Ibarra brought the footage to her captain, who was initially reluctant. Kane Global Industries was one of the city's largest employers and biggest political donors, but Maria refused to let it go. She personally called the school to make sure Lily was safely picked up by a family friend, and she personally walked into the holding area to release Daniel herself, 4 hours after his arrest, with a formal apology and a promise that this wasn't over. You did nothing wrong, she told him, her voice steady, and I intend to prove it. At the school, Lily had waited by the front steps, swinging her backpack strap and scanning the parking lot for her father's familiar pickup truck. When a family friend arrived instead, explaining gently that Daddy had been held up at work, the 8-year-old's face had fallen in a way that broke the friend's heart. Lily didn't cry. She simply went quiet, the way children sometimes do when they sense something is being kept from them. and asked only one question the entire ride home: "Is my daddy okay?" No one had a good answer for her, and that unanswered question would sit with Daniel long after the charges were dropped, a reminder of exactly what Victoria Kane's laugh had nearly cost. Daniel went home that night and held Lily so tightly she asked if something was wrong. He didn't tell her everything, not yet. He simply said, "Daddy had a hard day, but everything is going to be okay." He didn't fully believe it himself. He had lost half a day of work. His hands still shook from the humiliation, and the image of Victoria Kane's laughing face was burned into his memory. But something in Detective Ibarra's eyes had given him a small, stubborn ember of hope. Over the following 2 weeks, that ember grew into a fire. Detective Ibarra, working with the department's financial crimes unit, discovered that the shredded documents were only the surface of something much larger. Kane Global Industries had been quietly siphoning funds through a network of fake vendor contracts for nearly 3 years. Victoria Kane, desperate to maintain her image as an unstoppable business titan after 2 failed product launches, had authorized her chief financial officer to manufacture revenue, reports, and funnel company money into private accounts, real estate investments under shell names, and a lavish lifestyle that no longer matched the company's actual earnings. The near arrest of Daniel Cole, meant to be a 5-minute distraction, ended up drawing exactly the kind of law enforcement attention Victoria had spent years avoiding. Detective Ibarra didn't stop at proving Daniel's innocence. She built a full case, working with forensic accountants and a courageous whistleblower. Inside Kane Global Industries, a young accountant named Priya Nathan, who had been quietly documenting irregularities for over a year, terrified to come forward alone. Priya had tried twice before to report her concerns internally, only to be dismissed and quietly reassigned. When she learned that an innocent single father had nearly gone to jail because of Victoria Kane's carelessness and cruelty, something in her broke loose. She reached out to Detective Ibarra with 3 years of financial records, encrypted emails, and internal memos proving the fraud beyond doubt. The case moved quickly after that. A judge issued a search warrant for Kane Global Industries' financial records. Federal investigators joined the local police in what became one of the largest corporate fraud investigations the city had seen in a decade. And at the center of it all was one piece of footage that kept resurfacing in every briefing, every headline, every late-night news segment. A mechanic in oil-stained coveralls being handcuffed while a billionaire laughed. That image, once meant to humiliate Daniel, became the symbol of everything wrong with how power protects itself. And it became the reason the public paid attention when the real story broke. 6 weeks after Daniel's arrest, Victoria Kane was taken into custody at her penthouse, not in handcuffs meant for show, but in the quiet, procedural manner reserved for defendants whose guilt investigators are certain of. Cameras that once photographed her at galas and product launches now captured her being escorted into a federal building, her expression unreadable, the confidence she once wore like armor visibly cracking. The fraud charges were staggering: wire fraud, securities fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Her assets were frozen. The company's board, humiliated and desperate to salvage what remained of Kane Global Industries' reputation, forced her resignation within days. Daniel watched the news coverage from his small living room, Lily asleep on the couch beside him, her small hand resting on his arm even in sleep. He felt no triumph, no desire for revenge. Mostly, he felt exhausted relief, the kind that settles into your bones after carrying fear for 4. Detective Ibarra visited him personally to deliver the news that all charges against him had been formally dismissed, his record expunged, and that the city, facing public pressure after the footage went viral, was offering a formal apology along with a settlement that would finally give him breathing room. enough to expand his garage, hire 2 employees, and move Lily into a small house with a backyard, something he had promised her since Sarah passed away. "You didn't have to fight for me the way you did," Daniel told Maria, his voice thick with gratitude he didn't know how to fully express. "Yes, I did," she said simply. "Somebody has to actually look. Most people don't." Priya Nathan, the whistleblower, later told a local reporter that watching a stranger get arrested for a crime he didn't was the moment she realized silence was its own kind of guilt. She left Kane Global Industries and went on to help other employees at struggling companies recognize and report financial misconduct, turning her fear into purpose. As for Victoria Kane, her trial became a national conversation about accountability, about the assumptions wealth allows people to make, about who deserves the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't. She was ultimately sentenced to 11 years in federal prison, her empire dismantled piece by piece, sold off to cover restitution to shareholders and employees who had trusted her. The tower that once bore her name was quietly rebranded within a year. Daniel never testified out of anger. When called to the stand during her trial, he simply told the truth, what happened that morning, how it felt to be handcuffed in front of strangers, while a woman he had never wronged laughed at, his humiliation, and how it felt to wonder, even for a few hours, whether his daughter would grow up believing her father was a criminal. He didn't ask for sympathy. He didn't need to. The footage, and his quiet dignity on the stand, spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Word of the case spread quickly through Ashford City, and something unexpected happened in its wake. Other small business owners who had once felt powerless against wealthy clients began speaking up about their own experiences of being dismissed, blamed, or quietly cheated out of payment simply because they lacked the resources to fight back. A local community organization invited Daniel to speak at a town hall about small business rights, and though public speaking terrified him far more than any courtroom ever had, he stood at the podium with Lily in the front row and told his story plainly, without embellishment, because he had learned that the plain truth was the most powerful thing he owned. Afterward, 3 separate families approached him with similar stories of being wrongly accused by wealthy clients, and Daniel, together with Detective Ibarra, helped connect them with legal aid resources so their own truths might finally be heard. A year later, Daniel's garage had tripled in size. A hand-painted sign above the door read, "Cole and Daughter Auto Repair," a promise to Lily that one day, if she wanted, this would be hers too. She was 9 now, already fascinated by engines, always asking her father questions he loved answering. Every evening, they still got ice cream, though now it was to celebrate instead of to comfort. Detective Ibarra remained close with the family, stopping by occasionally, sometimes just to see how Lily was doing in school. She often said that the case reminded her why she became a detective in the first place, not to enforce power, but to protect the people power tends to overlook. Daniel rarely spoke about Victoria Kane anymore. When people asked if he hated her, he usually paused before answering. "I don't hate her," he'd say. "I feel sorry for someone who thought laughing at another person's pain made her strong." Real strength was never about who you can put down. It's about who you can lift up when nobody's watching. Somewhere, in a quiet federal facility, far from the tower that once bore her name, Victoria Kane spent her nights replaying that morning in the parking garage. The laugh, the handcuffs, the small, satisfied curl of her lips that had once felt like power and now felt like the beginning of her own undoing. She had built an empire on the assumption that some people simply didn't matter enough to fight back. She learned, far too late, that the world doesn't work that way. Not really, not ever, not for long. And Daniel Cole, the single father who once knelt in a parking garage with grease on his hands and nothing but the truth on his side, kept building, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because somewhere along the way, he had learned the one lesson his daughter would carry with her for the rest of her life. That dignity, patience, and honesty are quieter than power, but they outlast it every single time. If this story moved you, remember to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always finds its way to the light, no matter how long it takes.